Hey everyone, welcome to this live stream from the new PodCraft community. Hopefully, we're going to get a few people joining us here for some excellent questions all around podcasting and anything related. We'll probably stick to podcasting, but happy to answer anything really, anything within expertise. But yeah, I'm looking at the Circle community just now, so we'll give it a few minutes to see if we can get some people dropping in, but we've definitely got some pre-submitted questions from the Circle community as well. And I also have the most amazing Allegra in the background as well, looking for questions inside the community, looking to see if anybody's popping in. But yeah, we'll answer those as we go. But if you want a little quick intro, if you're joining us from anywhere else, maybe you're joining us free because I've put this from open Twitter or whatever, because I've just put the invite out on Twitter to see if we can get some more people into the community here. We've just started this up in the last couple of weeks, really, moving over from an old Facebook community, actually. So we're coming into Circle, trying to create a space that we can kind of make a bit more our own, I suppose, and also somewhere it's a bit more open. We were getting a lot of pushback on using Facebook over time, people not wanting to be on there anymore. So instead, we're coming on using the Circle platform and hopefully going to build a great community in here, share a whole bunch of resources. We've got some stuff to share for free in here, as well as obviously the conversations and all the answers that you need for starting your podcast. And we're going to bring together, the idea is to bring together all of our communities as well. Turn it into one, because we've had so many over the years. We've obviously got Alitu now, but we've had PodCraft as our podcast over the many years as well. PodCraft being the show that I started probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago now, and ran with Matthew for the past 4 or 5 potentially. Other people have hosted it at some points as well. I remember Robert Cudmore that worked for us for a while. One of the famous voices in Matthew's Scottish podcast was a voice in PodCraft for a little while. Shows you that you can make a podcast hosted by anyone. You can change it around. You can change things up. People have followed us along in the PodCraft podcast. As long as you keep that quality high, keep putting the value out, it can work for you. So that's what PodCraft is really as a brand, but we want to create something else around it. We want to create this community. We're going to change over the newsletter, which was Pod Pointers as well, turn that into the PodCraft pointers too, and bring everything in around PodCraft really, because that's what we're all about. It's that PodCraft. It's the craft of podcasting, the art of podcasting, as I'm sometimes want to say. And Alitu, obviously, as our tool, our podcast maker tool, is a huge part of that. It's the way that we help you make that podcast. The podcasthost.com is all about teaching you how to do it. PodCraft is about going deep on it in the podcast. The Academy, the old Academy, which we're going to rename to the PodCraft community as well, really, is all part of that. And that's all the courses and everything. And we're going to bring it all together under this banner. So that's the whole purpose. So hopefully we've got a few people in watching now. And let's get to a few questions then. Okay, right, let me pop over to the questions, and Allegra will pop in some at the same time as well. So, as always, we do get questions which are the kind of the most common ones, which are, I was asked this earlier on today as well, actually, around length and frequency as well. always comes up. So it's always good to go back and give a new answer to this. So length and frequency. How long should a podcast be? What is it these days? What is the ideal length for a podcast these days? Well, these days, the community, in recent years, people have based it around the average length of a commute, which in America, apparently, is about 24 minutes. I'm sure in the UK, it's probably something similar, maybe a little bit less, because we tend to drive a little bit less than our friends over in America. But anyway, that kind of 20 to 25 minute period has been touted as the ideal length of a podcast in the past because it suits that commute. But to be honest, I'm not sure I quite buy into that. I don't think that we need to base our podcast around anything in particular, around anything like a commute or a drive or whatever. I think the whole power of podcasting, the reason that podcasting is so great and so powerful is that really you can make it whatever you like. And in fact, the length of a podcast can be its unique factor. You can make a podcast that's really short, 3 to 5 minutes. news bulletins, and that's part of its uniqueness, part of the reason that people subscribe to it, because it's so short and sharp and great, and you just get your information in no time at all. But equally, your uniqueness can be it's really long. There's shows out there like Joe Rogan show, like Tim Ferriss, like Dan Carlin, who do 3+ hours per episode, and people listen, people follow along for all that time because the show goes deep, it takes its time, it goes in depth, and you relax and you jump into it and you just follow along. And that's great. So the length of a podcast, honestly, you choose your length as long as you're purposeful about it and as long as you're packing value into the whole show. I mean, that's really when it can go wrong. When you're spending an hour and you think the content you're getting, the interview you're doing, the material you're delivering is only really worth half an hour, and you're starting to pad it out because you have this idea that you should go for an hour because that's what my podcast always is. That's when it can go wrong, because you really need to let the length of the podcast be dictated by the content. Take as long as you need to explain the content and no more. That is all about the length of a podcast. Okay. That being said, I would say in the early days, it is quite a good idea. It's quite a nice idea to at least make your podcast in the kind of shorter region to let people get to know you before you jump into, 2-hour episodes. Maybe it is a good idea to do, 20 to 30-minute episodes to make it a little bit more accessible, to let people get to know you, for you to practice, to make it sustainable for yourself. You're not taking too long to get that podcast out there. And it just makes it easier for you to stay consistent and get to know the show and get to know the medium and really get that stuff out there. So 20 to 30 minutes, if you really want a guide, I would say that's a decent length these days, given sort of data around shows that work well. So aim for that in general. And in terms of frequency, the answer is similar. It's, it depends. It depends. It's up to you how many you put out there, how often you put it out there. The one kind of rule of thumb there is that weekly does tend to work quite well. It's the tradition. It's the tradition for a reason, because we build our lives around a weekly cadence. Often we tend to build our lives around, putting things out every week, or, doing the same thing every week. We do that thing on Tuesday night every week. We go to that club on Thursday night every week, that kind of thing. So weekly cadences tend to work with us as human beings. And also it tends to work. Well, that's from a listener point of view. So you listen to the same show that time every week. But from a creator point of view, it's similar. We create the show on Monday morning every single week. And it tends to be what I've found certainly an easier cadence to stick to. If you want to keep something sustainable, you want to put something out week after week after week, a weekly show tends to be sustainable and a decent balance between, going too often, so not doing a daily show, but still growing it, fast. Fortnightly, you can still grow a show reasonably fast, but monthly, you're down to a cadence, which is quite hard to grow a show at any kind of speed if you're only putting out a monthly episode. So I would say weekly is the best for many cases, but fortnightly is possible as well. Okay, hope that answers that question. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over and just check that if there's any more questions popped up on YouTube as well, because we've got it on over there, just in case somebody from that channel over and just check. Okay, right. Allegra, could you direct me towards, so there's some questions that were directed on Circle ahead of time. If you can pop me that link, because I'm having a little bit of trouble finding it right now, I'll be honest. And I'll get another question out in the meantime as well. So like, if you could just pop that in as a comment on StreamYard, that would be most excellent. And I can get those questions answered. But the other one that I got earlier on today, actually, that somebody posted in for this ahead of time, was around growth. So it was what people can do. Somebody was, it was a person I was talking to that was asking for some unusual tips around growth. Not just the standard stuff, not just tell them to post something out on Twitter or onto Facebook or onto Instagram or whatever. Not just to promote things on, not just to use SEO or anything like that, although I'll come back to that in a little while. But anyway, a more unique way was something that actually was taught to me by Matthew. Now, Matthew, I'm popping up that link onto the screen. Matthew used to use a technique in the pub, which was to grow his podcast, which was to get beer mats printed out for his show. Now, if you don't know what a beer mat is, then I'm not sure whether that translates to international audiences around the world. But a beer mat is that little kind of, that little flexible piece of paper that's quite thick. It mops up the beer. It tends to go all soggy and minging by the end of the day. But anyway, there are these little cards you can get printed up and print in merch stores. You can get your podcast artwork printed onto these because coincidentally, they tend to be square. So they work with podcast cover art really well. So what you can do is you can go to a merch store. You can get your podcast artwork. You can get your podcast artwork popped onto one of these beer mats. And then as you're out and about on a town of an evening, you take these beer mats with you, you pop them down the tables, and then people pop in, they get their drink, they put them down on the beer mat, and they see these little things in front of them. And they're drinking down their pint and they see them on the bottom. And Matthew has said that this works really well for them because they have, they have a show that they can put quotes onto the beer mat. They can put some funny quotes on there because it's a comedy show that he runs, but equally it would work for an educational show as well. Okay, beer mats though, they're a good little tip. Right. Okay, I'm just going to ask Allegra for that link in a different place. Oh, here she comes. Excellent. Right. Okay, so any other questions? If anybody has any questions, by all means, pop them into the chat on the side as well. Right. Here we go. Okay, I've got them. Thank you very much, Allegra. Just found them now. Right. Do you recommend any of the free hosting services as well? That was one that was popped into the circle group earlier on today as well. Now, free hosting services, this is a bit of a debate. And I had this conversation with somebody on a podcast interview earlier on as well. So there's obviously a whole bunch of different podcast hosting services out there. Many have their own pros and cons, their own strengths and weaknesses. The big strength of some, such as, let's say, Anchor, is that it's free. And there's other free options out there as well. Anchor has grown hugely over the last few years because they have been free, essentially because they're free, because they're an easy way to get into the podcasting space, really. Now, the benefit of this is that they allow people to dabble. I've got nothing against Anchor, actually, for that type of podcast. If you want to come in here, you want to test it out, you want to create 5 or 10 episodes even on Anchor because you don't know this is what's for you. Many people come into podcasting and find out, it's not really the medium for them in the end. So why invest, $20 a month to do that and find that out? So by all means, if you're coming into podcasting, you want to test it out, you want to see if it's for you, by all means, use a free service like Anchor and put your podcast out there, test it out, dabble with it, see if you like it. Beware of the downsides being that there's less ownership over your show in terms of that. Anchor tends to submit the podcast direct to iTunes for you, so you might not have control over the feed in that way. They also, because it's free, there's terms and conditions in there. That means they have some more ownership over your show. They may be able to reuse your materials in some ways as well. Those kind of terms and conditions tend to be built into services that are free because there's that old adage, which is if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And to Anchor and the other free podcasting services, the podcast, your podcast is their product. That's what they are making money out of. So they will be putting, encouraging or strongly suggesting to put advertising into that podcast because they'll get a cut of it. Many services that are free will actually insert adverts automatically onto the start or the end of a podcast. So just be aware when you're signing up for something like Anchor or another free service like that, that's the downsides. That if you want to take it seriously, if you want to have full ownership over your show, then it's worthwhile investing a little bit into, that podcast of yours and spending even, as little as $10, $15, $20 a month for a podcast hosting service that will give you full control, full ownership. And it's your show, And there's even the little, it's not probably the case for Anchor, but you never quite know. They're owned by Spotify, so they're not likely to go under. But I've seen free podcast platforms in the past go under, go out of business and disappear overnight, literally overnight, because they never found a sustainable way to keep themselves going. And nobody was paying for the service. So it's a difficult one. Okay. Let's look at the next question, which is, if I stopped podcasting for 6 months, should I do another launch? Okay, interesting question. Yeah. This is the case for quite a few people. Often you'll take a break. You'll think, I've been running this podcast for quite a while. Now I need to take a little break. I want to restart. I want to start afresh. Should I do another launch? Now, it depends what you mean by launch. The launch is an often over egged element of podcasting. Podcasting is a long term medium. Unless you start podcasting with an enormous audience, unless you have, a huge blog, a huge email list, a huge social media following, it's unlikely you're going to launch your podcast to a listenership of 10,000 people right off. Podcasting is a long-term medium. So it takes a few months to build up a decent audience and going beyond that to get to a big audience. So the launch, unless you've got a huge, audience to launch to, it's not hugely important. Now, a relaunch could be something worth considering depending on how you believe or how you think about that. If you want to go out there and just build a bit of hype with the people that follow you on Twitter, follow you on social, follow your newsletter, that kind of thing, certainly make a bit of noise about it. Certainly make a bit of noise around the fact that you're putting your podcast back out there. You want to, let people know why you were away for a little while, why you've come back. In fact, ignore that. That I often tell people. I'm just going back in my own advice. Nobody cares why you were away or why you're coming back. What they want to know is what you're going to do for them. They're selfish people, those listeners out there. I don't mean it that negatively, but it is. People are selfish because they have very little time. They want to know why they should listen. They want to know what you're going to do for them. So let them know what you're going to do for them. Even forget about the excuses, the apologies, all that kind of stuff. Just relaunch it with as much info as you can about why they need to listen to this new version of your show. But again, the whole launch thing, don't worry too much about it. Just put that podcast back out there. You'll get some people who are still subscribed. Put it back on your newsletter, your email list, all that kind of stuff. Get it out there and launch it. Yeah. Don't worry too much. The big thing here is that a lot of people put off launching a podcast, starting a podcast, I should say, to separate the start from the launch. A lot of people put off starting a podcast because they think that launching a podcast is a big deal. They think that so much work has to go into the launch, the promotion. And if you mess up your launch, then you're you're knackered. You're not going to get anywhere. It's the whole stuff around new noteworthy back in the day. Like if you didn't make it into new noteworthy, you weren't going to grow at all, which is nonsense. We tested this so many times over the years. New noteworthy does not matter that much at all. So concentrate instead on just making sure you make that first relaunch episode good. Certainly announce it to your audience in whatever way you can, and then just get that show out there again every week, and make sure the content is great. That is the most important thing by far. Okay. Next question. We've got a few more on here. That's great to see. Okay. My question is about attributing multiple songs to different people. I was wondering how to go about doing so. For example, if I were to have borrowed a song from Alitu, how would I attribute it to you guys? By the way, I'm using YouTube. Okay, songs are complicated. So it's the easiest thing to do to just actually um, use a service that makes it really clear how the licensing works. So mentioning Alitu there, for example, we make it really clear in our terms and conditions that you can use your songs, your Alitu songs. If you use a song from Alitu's free music library, you can use it for as long as you're a member. Okay. The way it works is that you can use it as long as you're a member and release new episodes as long as you're a member. But after you stop being a member, so after you cancel your membership, all of those old episodes can still contain that song by all means. There's no need to remove that at all. As long as the episode was made live while you were an active member, then that is absolutely fine. That's how the licensing works. But then after you're a member, then you would have to find a new song. And there's no need for attribution on that at all. You don't need to attribute it. As long as a song is royalty free, and as long as it doesn't have a requirement to attribute, that'll be in the terms and conditions when you see it, then you don't need to attribute it at all. So you don't need to with Alitu. So you don't need to mention Alitu at all. It would be much appreciated if you do, obviously, but there's no need for you to do that. And there's a few other services out there as well that you can subscribe to that do exactly the same thing. So one, for example, is Um, Story blocks, they're called. Um, so let me pop up a few links on the stream for you on here, because we've got an article on this that will give you a guide to all the best places to find music. So Storyblocks is one. It's a subscription service. You pay monthly, and then you can. There we go. So I'll pop that up on the screen. So that link there will take you to an article that we wrote on thepodcasthost.com. And we'll show you all the different options. But yeah, Storyblocks is one great one. You subscribe to them, $20 a month-ish, and you can use as many of their songs as you like. It's the same setup as Alitu. You can use their songs for new episodes as long as you're an active member. Epidemic as well is another great one. Epidemic Music, and they're a bit cheaper. They're only $13 per month, and you can use them too. But they both make their licensing very simple and don't require attribution. The only time you actually do require attribution is if it's a free song. So you'll get places like now what was it called again? Incompetech, I think it's called. Incompetech, I believe. And they used to have a set of free songs which you could use completely no cost as long as you attributed them. And that was part of the terms and conditions. And you get things called, you get a certain setup called Creative Commons as well, which lets you use any of their songs for free as long as you attribute it. You say, this was by blah, 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 from blah, 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 go and find them over at blah, blah, blah.com. So that's the only time you do have to attribute, but many places you don't have to. Okay, next question. I'm going to answer Jason's actually, because Jason's live on the call, which is great to see. So Jason, you want to start one about crypto? That's great, just for fun, really. But there's loads of shows like that already. I feel like it'll get you all lost. How do I make it unique? Okay, and you've got another one there about launching until you've got a full season. Great stuff. Two great questions, Jason. I love it. So let's answer that now. The uniqueness one is really interesting. We've got some great, so I've got a structure I've written around this, about how to make your podcast unique. So I'm going to pop that up on the screen as well. So this article here, or if you just go on thepodcasthost.com and search unique using the little search box up the top, you'll get it as well. But the general gist is that there's a few different ways to make your podcast unique. I think the ways are, one way is format, okay? So you can break up a podcast with unique features, for example. So the format of it can make it really unique. So you could break it up into different segments. You can have like a quiz segment. You can have a news segment. You can have an interview segment, break it up in that way. So format is one way to make it really unique. Length is part of that format as well. So you can make a long podcast, 3 hours long, go really in depth. That's one way to be unique. Really short, sharp news in your area, sharp tips, a 5-minute tip every day in your area. That can be a way to make it unique as well for people that just want a quick tip. And frequency too can be a way to be unique, although it's harder these days. I mean, a daily show used to be unique, but isn't that unique anymore. But frequency is definitely one way to think about it. And the other part of format is your hosts as well. So perhaps being a solo show actually is a way to be unique. It's just one person. So you've got super control over the content that you put out there because it's just you. There's no interview. You just have full control. You can make it nice and short and sharp and full of value. So that's part of the hosts. But equally, maybe it's co-hosts. That actually feels quite unique these days, like having two people that know each other well with good chemistry, talking about a topic they know well, just having a conversation. That can actually be quite unique these days because so many shows are interview shows. Or it could even be a round table, 5 or 6 people. So that's one way, make it unique by format, okay? Another way, a second way is topic. So a unique topic. So one way is to take your topic, cryptocurrency. So you're talking about cryptocurrency. Maybe it's a personal angle on it. Maybe it's something like something related to your background, like you're a traditional banker. So you're coming at the cryptocurrency world from a very traditional, more safe way or something like that. Maybe that's your angle on it. And that's your uniqueness because of your background, because of your knowledge. Or maybe it's a niche. So maybe you take a niche of cryptocurrency. Maybe you go NFTs inside the cryptocurrency world, or you do just a Bitcoin or an Ethereum or a Solana podcast just on their own, and take a little niche of it. So that's another way to do it as well. Remember these as well. you don't necessarily have to be pigeonholed into these. Okay. So if you choose one of these angles, one of these niches, or even one of these formats, it doesn't mean you have to stay like that forever. So you can test things out, you can change things up. So don't worry about being stuck in that way. The last way that I tend to talk about being unique, actually, there's two ways, but the third way is outcome. Okay. So thinking about the outcome you want people to get from this show. So with a cryptocurrency one, for example, maybe there's probably legal reasons that you shouldn't do this, but maybe the outcome is that you want people to invest in a certain cryptocurrency every episode or something like that. So you actually promise them an outcome of some sort. With financial stuff, I can see that probably would be trouble, but other shows, I've done educational shows where the outcome is the uniqueness, because every time I will give them a lesson with an action and make them have an actual specific successful outcome every single episode. Maybe there's something that could fit in there with you. So outcome is one. And the final is production quality. So there is a way to be unique in terms of production quality, as in maybe you put a bit more effort into that. You actually talk, you interview somebody for an hour, but you actually edit that down to 30 minutes and put in some music and effects in the background and you make it sound really cool, documentary style. So production quality is another way too. But certainly pop onto that link there, thepodcasthost.com/planning /how to make your podcast unique. And that will give you some ideas. So, yeah, Jason responded saying, yeah, I was thinking of having a co-host, or maybe a guest was worried about too much to listen to. No, that's a great point, Jason. It's really nice that having actually something to break up the standard interviewee format, because it's very overdone in many ways. There's a lot of people doing that kind of show these days. So I've seen actually it done really well, where you've got two co-hosts that know each other really well, and then one third person who's a guest brought on, because it can create, you've got the chemistry between the two co-hosts, but you've got the extra unique knowledge brought in by the guest. So the two co-hosts can have a bit of banter back and forth, can swap questions back and forth, talking to the guest, bringing in the guest, and it tends to make it more conversational too when you've got three people rather than two, because it's kind of breaks it up a little bit, feels a little bit less formal. So it can work really nicely, that actually. Okay, Jason, I'll just answer your other question first, and then Mads has popped one in too, Mads. So I'll get to yours next, okay? Now, Jason said, I've seen people say you shouldn't even bother launching until you've got a full season recorded. Myth or not? Good question. Back to the launch question. Okay. So, yes, myth. But there's qualifications behind this. I would often recommend people to perhaps have 3 or 4 episodes recorded in the bag before you launch, for the simple reason that you want to have a bit of a buffer generally before you launch your show. Because one of the best ways to grow a show is just to be consistent, is to get that show out every single week. So having no, just launching an episode and sticking it out there in the world, and then next week coming to do another and get that out, and then next week doing another and getting that out. And if you miss a week, you miss a week. There's no buffer. That can be tricky. But if you actually record up 4 or so before you launch, then you've got a month's worth of buffer. You can miss a week. And you can not have to actually, you cannot skip a week in terms of the podcast itself. And then you can maybe catch that up in future, or maybe not. It depends. So that buffer can be quite useful. The other thing is, if you launch with 3 or 4 episodes, when you're making a bit of a noise about it in the early days, you announce it to any audience you have. This is presuming you have one. Then when somebody finds you in those first 1, 2 episodes, then they'll have a few other things to listen to, which can then really hook them in. If they find one episode, they might want to listen to more. And therefore, they'll listen to 3 or 4, and it can really hook them in and really make them loyal to you and really sort of give them a lot to listen to and get addicted to. Whereas if you launch with just 1 episode, they'll listen to that one and they'll enjoy it, but they might forget and they've not got enough to binge on to really get addicted to your content. So that's one argument for putting it out with 3 or 4 episodes to start with. I think launching with a full season is just a recipe for procrastination. It'll take you a long time to put together a full season, and that's probably 3, 4, 5 months even that you're not live to the world. Instead, there's a lot of value to being out there already. There's a lot of value to just releasing that first episode, getting it out into the world, and then just going for it and not wasting those 2, 3, 4, 5 months that it would take you to put together a full season. I mean, just imagine that if you had an idea for a podcast, something quite unique, something quite cool, something related to maybe a current event that you're going to go on with, a new TV series or something like that, or anything at all. Imagine you had that idea and you were planning to launch it, you started to record some episodes, and somebody else launched something exactly the same in the meantime, just because you'd held back to have 3, 4, 5 episodes in the bag. So, in many cases, I would say if it's going to take you longer than a month to put together a few episodes, I think just get it out there. There's so much value to just starting and having your show live and out in the world. So, I think just get started as much as you can. Okay, let's see. So, Mads, thank you for popping in some questions. Nice to see you here. So, your question. I'm thinking about doing an actual play audio drama tabletop role. Oh, excellent. Good topic. Should talk to Matthew about this. He's doing a tabletop podcast at the moment as well. Should I provide transcripts and where should the transcripts live? Okay, good question. Transcripts. Yes, best practice is to do transcripts simply for accessibility purposes to allow people with hearing troubles, hard of hearing, accessibility troubles around audio to still access your content. There are a lot of people who can't necessarily listen to a podcast in a normal way, still want to consume this material. So it's good practice to do that and make it available. It's also, though, of benefit to you because if you have text material on there, those transcripts can actually be really valuable to your listeners who listen to the podcast as standard. Your listeners who are just listening away to the show, they might want to actually read the transcript to review the content afterwards. So putting them onto the website can actually be a really valuable thing to do onto your website. And in fact, I've seen podcasts in the past offer transcripts as a sort of lead magnet or an opt-in bonus. Like if you sign up for my email list, then I'll send you the transcript every single week, that kind of thing. And people like getting that, and it can get people onto your mailing list so that you can then keep in touch with them more effectively and grow your show more quickly. So transcripts can be really valuable that way. Where they should live is generally, I would say, I mean, Patreon, certainly what I've just talked about, that kind of lead magnet thing, that to encourage people to sign up for your Patreon, certainly put them on there as a bonus. They can be valuable to people, so they could encourage people to sign up. But equally, if you're thinking from an accessibility point of view, making your content as accessible as possible, perhaps you'd want them public, or at least not behind a paywall. So maybe people would have to sign up to a mailing list to get it, but it doesn't cost them any. So there's only the barrier of signing up. So that's one way. But I would recommend, I mean, just from an accessibility point of view, to put those transcripts just right on your website, whatever website you've got associated with your podcast, pop them on there and they'll be associated with your show notes. The question around transcript or show notes is interesting too, in that a transcript can act as show notes, but it's not necessarily the best form of show notes because a transcript doesn't tend to be the best reading experience. It can be quite nice to skim through to review stuff, but actually, for you to write up a set of show notes that really summarizes the material, gives the takeaways, shares the resources, that can be really valuable to your listeners. Um, and that could go alongside a full transcript, really. People really want to go to your website and grab the sort of have a skim through the show notes to really see what you talked about, to review the content you gave away, to look at the links that you mentioned, and then they might want to review the full transcript afterwards. But more often than not, they just want the short version. So generally, you would have both, but it is time consuming to do both. So again, don't let that get in the way of your consistency. Okay, Jason, no worries at all. He said, thanks. That's cool. I'm happy to help. Right, Mads. Let me do one more from you. Just noticed Martin as well. Martin Lindeskog is on the feed, which is excellent. Good to see you, Martin. I'll answer your question in just a second. Right, Mads. Is there any real effect if you publish an episode on a particular day of the week regularly? So people will debate about this with you all day. Truthfully, I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. Certainly in the standard world of podcasting like us, when we've not got millions of listeners, I don't believe it makes a difference. I mean, Mads, tell me in the comments, do you know the publishing schedule of any shows that you listen to? Like, are there any shows that you know come out at 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning? And if they didn't, you would miss it. Let me know that in the comments if you can. It'd be interesting to know. But from my point of view, there's none. I listen to dozens of podcasts. I'm a big fan of quite a few podcasts, but I still couldn't tell you when any of them publish. I really just, whenever I want to listen to a show, I pull out my phone, I open it up, I look through Pocket Casts I use, and it orders things by recency. So it does show me who's published most recently, but I don't care really which one I listen to at any given time. I'll just look through the list and I'll say, I'm in the mood for that one. I'm in the mood for that one. And if people haven't published, I don't miss it. I just get them the next time I open my phone and they pop up and they just publish the content thing. So that's my thoughts on it. But I do know other people with experience in this area that do think it can be valuable to publish in a regular schedule. And I can see that, a news show or something like that, something that is a little bit more topical, maybe it does make a lot of sense. But I feel almost that the power of podcasting is that we're a lot more flexible than radio, TV, blah, blah, blah. So we can stick to our own schedule. We can make it easier on ourselves by not building a rod for our own back and having to do it on Thursday morning every week. Saying that occurs to me that I do talk about the fact that consistency and routine are a big help in getting a podcast out there. So even if you don't release at a certain time of the week, I do often recommend having a certain time of the week when you record. So record every morning, every Tuesday morning, for example, which can lend itself to publishing then at that regular time too. So I would say don't make it get in the way of putting your show out there, but I don't think it's a killer if you don't. All right. Right. Mads responded saying some shows I listen to come out on Thursday or Friday. Actually, I've just realized, Mads, I think you were partly asking about are any particular days of the week better? Is that right? Certainly, that is a question that comes up. So it's a good question. The data that we've seen in the past has suggested no, that there's no one magical day. Like if you release on a Thursday, you'll tend to get more listens than a Tuesday. Or if you release on a Monday, you'll get more listens than a Sunday, that kind of thing. I think, again, because podcasting is such a on demand, in your own time medium, that it doesn't make that much difference when you publish because people just listen when they want to, when they're ready, when they're in the mood. So don't worry too much. I hope that answers your question. Martin. Actually, Martin's just asking a question of Jason. He's interested in Jason's podcast. Are you going to be a listener of Jason's podcast, Martin? That's cool. Have you listened to Bad Crypto? I'll have to go and have a listen to that as well. There's a couple of people on the team here, including myself, who are quite interested in crypto as well. Our head of growth, Jacob, too, is well into crypto. So we might be both listening to that show in the near future. Okay, right. I think that's the live questions all answered at the moment. So if anyone is on live right now and is interested in getting their question answered. I'm popping over to YouTube. There's a few extra ones on here. The magical day differs everywhere, Mad says. Yes, that's right. Okay, cool. So let me go back to a couple of the pre-asked questions because there's a couple of them I've not answered yet. Okay. Right. So one of the pre-asked questions was, how do you pick which social platforms you use to promote your podcast? So truthfully, we choose none. We have been having this conversation on the team here at the Podcast Host for a while. We don't do a lot of social because we do evergreen content. That's kind of our strength. We blog, we podcast, we do YouTube. We do evergreen stuff that lasts forever. It's long form, goes deep. We don't do a whole lot of social. But I know it works well for many other people. The bit of advice I would have on this is you need to find out where your people hang out, where your tribe hangs out. That's what it's all about. There's no magic place. So it's all about the audience that you're building. It's all about the sector you're in. It's all about your ideal audience, your ideal persona. Where do they hang out? Because it's going to be different for every single audience. Like, for example, Well, traditionally gamers. So if you're doing a video gaming podcast, Discord was always a great place for gamers to hang out. It was a really popular social medium for gamers. So maybe you would want to start up a Discord community or get involved in other communities and promote yourselves that way. Otherwise, if you're an entrepreneurial show, building startups or marketing, that kind of thing, that tends to be a Twitter thing. So maybe you get on Twitter and start promoting it that way. Or maybe you're a more traditional consultancy firm, and then LinkedIn actually is the best place to promote it. Maybe I'm very biased there. That's how I see LinkedIn. Or maybe you're much more visual and actually Instagram. So if you get my point, it's that every social medium has its own type of people, its own demographic, its own area, and every audience has its own more preferred place to go. And it can vary all over the place, like places like Reddit. Reddit, and I always hear about Reddit. I never use Reddit. I have no idea about how Reddit works. Well, I don't know how it works, but I never use it. But there's plenty of communities on there too. So really, there's no right answer here. But the way to find it out is really ask your audience, find the people that you want to speak to in the podcast, try and speak to some of them in person or on social or in whatever way you can. Ask them, where do you hang out? What social media do you use the most? Because that'll give you a clue as to where there's more of that type of person. And then that's where you should concentrate your time. Okay, right. Let's see. Next one. Oh, that was a one from YouTube as well. Okay, I think that's all our pre-asked questions then. So let's pop back over here, see if there's any more on YouTube for now. I'm happy to hang around. That's just gone about 40 minutes now. I'm happy to go longer, but if all the questions are drying up, then certainly I will sign off in just a minute. But it's been great to see everybody. Thank you, anyone watching just now. Thank you to everyone that popped on live. It's really good to launch our Circle community properly and our PodCraft community. I need to get used to how we talk about this as well because it's quite new to us at the moment. And we're running on a piece of software called Circle, but it's our PodCraft community for listeners of PodCraft, for readers of the podcast host, for members of our old academy, for users of Alitu, for everyone that's part of our audience and that follows along with the work we do. So if you're one of those people, then thank you very much for being part of our community. And Mads has just popped in a wee thank you again there. Most welcome, Mads, anytime. And hopefully we'll do more of these in future. And I'll see you, Martin, Jason, and all of the people that popped in questions ahead of time. I appreciate you popping them in as well. I hope I've answered them satisfactorily. But obviously, if you have any more questions, pop them in. I'll check in on this live broadcast in the PodCraft community over the next few days. If you have any comments, any questions, we have one more. But if you have any comments, any questions, then do pop them into the stream, into the comments, I should say, in the PodCraft community, and I'll answer them over time. But we do have one last question here. Let me answer this one before I pop off. Should I separately post my podcast to SoundCloud, even though it's not connected to my host? Okay, good question. SoundCloud was one of the older audio labels. Always had one of the older audio platforms, I should say. Always had a bit of trouble. SoundCloud was always almost going out of business. And SoundCloud was before Anchor, but had all of the same problems, plus way more, as in it was very much not owned. You didn't really have much control at all over how things appeared on SoundCloud. The podcast feed, your RSS feed on SoundCloud was always a little bit, didn't have all the options you needed. It didn't actually have all of the different variables that iTunes required at one point. Like it only had one category, I think, and iTunes required 3. So SoundCloud was always a little bit troublesome as a pure podcast host. So we never recommended it. But if you are using a proper host, like Captivate, for example, a really good host there, Captivate, then by all means, SoundCloud is just another distribution platform, another place to get your podcast out there into the world. So yeah, absolutely no harm in putting it on there. What I would say is if you are putting it on there, if you are using these extra distribution methods, so Captivate is your core host, but you're posting it to SoundCloud, certainly put in ways for people to come back to Captivate from SoundCloud, because you don't want them to subscribe on SoundCloud if that's the case. You want them to really end up in the home base. So every time you post an episode on SoundCloud, I would be including a little explanation saying, hey, this is my podcast. Please do go and subscribe over at blah, 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 and actually include the link to captivate. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, no harm at all. SoundCloud still around despite all the troubles that they've had over the last few years. Okay, one last check over then. New live question in Circle. Excellent to see people are watching in the PodCraft community as well. Okay, really looking forward to the conversations we're going to start in the PodCraft community over the coming months. So please do pop them in, start some conversations, jump into all of the different topics, ask your questions, get feedback, talk to each other, check out the resources. I've popped in a bunch of ebooks and checklists in there already. I'm going to put some more in the near future as well. So it's been great to see you in there. And that's all good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us, folks. And we'll see you on another one of these in the near future. Cheers.